Hello, and welcome to the 33rd Annual International Festival of Authors at Harbourfront Centre. My name is Jasmine Hurlt, and I am the Director of Human Rights Watch Canada, and I am pleased to be your host for today's event. Today's event is also part of Human Rights Watch's book series, a biannual event in partnership with Authors at Harbourfront that seeks to raise awareness about human rights abuses around the world through works of fiction and nonfiction. You just heard now about Dawit Isaak, one of the 9 journalists held for more than a decade without charge or trial. To support PEN Canada's efforts to secure Dawit's freedom, please sign the petition outside after this event. Now, before we get started, I have a few items of business. This year, IFOA is a social media-friendly festival. So, while we remind you to please silence your phone, we invite you to update statuses and tweet IFOA using the hashtag IFOA. Now, just to give you a bit of an idea of the format for today, KOONCHUNG will read for about 10 minutes. This will be followed by an interview by Minky for approximately 40 minutes. Then we will have a question and answer period. There will be no intermission. With this event, the International Festival of Authors, in partnership with the Edinburgh International Book Festival and the British Council, brings to stage a unique series from around the world. This is the Toronto segment. We would like to welcome our delegates in the first row, who will be taking part in the latter part of tonight's panel. If any of you have tickets for an event that starts at 4 p.m. and you feel you must leave before the event is over, please try to leave as quietly as possible. At the end of the event, the author will be happy to sign books in the upper lobby of the Fleck Dance Theatre. Books by all the authors at the festival are also available for sale in the bookstores at both the Fleck Dance Theatre and the York Quay Centre locations. Now, on with the event. KOONCHUNG is a novelist, journalist, and screenwriter. Born in Shanghai and raised and educated in Hong Kong, he studied at the University of Hong Kong and Boston University. He has published more than a dozen Chinese-language books, and in 1976 founded the magazine City, of which he was the chief editor and then publisher for 23 years. He has been a producer on more than 13 films. Banned in China, KOONCHUNG's politically charged novel, The Fat Years, tells the story of the search for an entire month erased from official Chinese history. Please welcome KOONCHUNG, who will read from The Fat Years.
Good afternoon. I'm KOONCHUNG from Beijing, China. I wrote this book in year 2009 in Chinese. English is my second language. This excellent translation is done by Michael Duke, very senior professor of Chinese at University of British Columbia. And the book was set in China in year 2013. The reason I put it into the not-so-distant future is because I want to come up with some fictional events that can explain my view. Actually, it's all about the present. But when I was writing it in year 2009, I'm not sure my readers are with me. So I sort of set it a few years from 2009. So the first chapter will be called 2 Years From Now. And the basic story is sometime in 2011, the world went through another economic crisis. And China, again, managed to come out of it relatively unscathed. But during that year, particularly within 28 days, China had implemented, the state put forward some measures that only often ruthless authoritarian state can pull off. The strange thing is, after 2 years after these horrible events, a reign of terror, 2 years from that, by 2013, practically nobody remembered it. not only they don't talk about it, they genuinely seem to forget about it, except for a few very, very determined person who try to reconstruct the lost month. So it's about, that's the story, the conceit of the story. I'm going to read a few paragraphs from the first chapter, and then one or two paragraphs from one of the last chapters. The first chapter, as I've said, is called 2 Years From Now, and the first section is called Someone Not Seen in a Long Time. 1 whole month is missing. I mean, 1 whole month of 2011 has just disappeared. It's gone. It can't be found. Normally, February follows January, March follows February, April follows March, and so on. But now, after January, it's March. Or after February, it's April. Do you understand what I'm saying? We've skipped a month. 芳草地, just forget it, I said. Don't go looking for it. It's not worth it. Life's too short. Just look after yourself. No matter how clever I was, I could never change 芳草地. Then again, if you really wanted to search for a missing month, 芳草地 could be the one to do it. In his life, he'll probably spend quite a few missing months just existing. He was always turning up unexpectedly in odd places, like he had vanished for 1 million years and was being reborn just when you were least expecting him. Maybe someone like him really could accomplish such a politically unfashionable task as restoring a missing month. The thing is, at first, I didn't really notice that a whole month was missing. Even if other people told me about it, I wasn't really ready to believe them. Every day I read the newspapers and checked the internet. Every night I watched China Central Television and the Phoenix Channel, and I hung around with intelligent people. I didn't think that any major event had escaped my notice. I believe in myself, my knowledge, my wisdom, and my independent judgment. On the afternoon of the 8th day of the first lunar month of this year, as I left my home in Happiness Village No. 2 and set out on my usual walk to the Starbucks in the Tower Mall of Plenty, a jogger suddenly pulled up in front of me. Master Chen, the jogger gasped while trying to regain his breath. A whole month is missing. It's been missing for 2 years today. The jogger was wearing a basketball cap. I didn't recognize him at first. 芳草地, he said, as he took off his cap to reveal a bald head sporting a short ponytail held at the back with a rubber band. Suddenly, I knew who it was. 芳草地, why are you calling me master? He ignored me. A whole month is missing, Master Chen. What can we do about it? What can we do? He repeated rather desperately. It's been more than a month since we last met, hasn't it? I asked. Longer than that, Master Chen, you know. A whole month has disappeared. It's terrifying. What should we do about it? Fang said. I tried to change the subject. When do you get back to Beijing? He didn't answer, and then suddenly he sneezed. I handed him my card. Don't catch cold. You shouldn't be running around. We can meet later. My phone number and email are on the card. He put his cap back on and took my card. We can look for it together, he said. As I watched him jog off toward the Dongzimenwai Embassy Road area, I realized he wasn't just out for a jog. He was on a mission. And then these desperate people, together with the unbelieving Master Chen, they try to find out the truth. And they have a plan to kidnap a high official just to get to the truth. Of course, this is all fiction, because in real life, you can never ask a high official to tell you the truth. Only in fiction. I can force him to do that. This is from the high official, He Dongsheng. It was for the best they didn't remember. Well, he was asked to tell everything to them, to the kidnappers. It was for the best that they didn't remember. The previous leadership group, having the blood of those 28 days on their hands, was very eager for everyone to forget the events of that month. So they started to revise any materials they reported on that time. For example, they ordered that all newspapers in all public libraries should be in digital form only. We totally rewrote the history of those 28 days. Most importantly, we brought the date that China's ascendancy officially began forward to match the date that the global economy entered a period of crisis and stagnation, thus erasing the historical existence of that week of anarchy and those 3 weeks of harsh crackdown. No one objected to this distortion of reality, and practically no one even noticed it. Once in a while, when someone in or outside the country mentioned those events, we simply filtered them out. Very soon, the new version of things became the only available version. To tell you the truth, even I was pretty surprised. How could the Chinese people so easily forget such events? What I want to tell you is that definitely the central propaganda organs did do their job, but they were only pushing along a boat that was already on the move. If the Chinese people themselves had not already wanted to forget, we could not have forced them to do so. The Chinese people voluntarily gave themselves a large dose of amnesia medicine. Why, asked Little C and Fang Caodi together, why did the Chinese people do it? How could they? There must be some explanation. Didn't I tell you already, insisted He Dongsheng. I don't know. Little C and Fang Caodi was dumbfounded. I'm quite surprised too, added He Dongsheng, seeing that they were all speechless. Real life isn't like a detective story, and everything doesn't have a perfect explanation. I have to admit this is one big riddle that I can't solve. It could be that human beings are simply forgetful animals, and they long to forget some aspects of their history. It could be that the Chinese Communist Party is just plain lucky. It could be that the Chinese people deserve to be governed by the Communist Party, and 60+ years is still not enough. It could be a miracle, or the Chinese people's common karma. Too bad I'm a materialist. Otherwise, I could certainly say that it was the will of heaven. That heaven wants the Chinese Communist Party to go on governing. Heaven saved my party. Thank you.
Thank you, Chen. It was so lovely hearing you read from the book. I read the book and I loved it, but just to hear you read a few paragraphs was really inspiring and I think perked everybody's interest to read it if they haven't so far. Chen will now be joined on the stage by Minky Warden. Minky is the Director of Global Initiatives at Human Rights Watch and the editor of The Unfinished Revolution, Voices from the Global Fight for Women's Rights. She is also the editor of China's Great Leap and Torture. Minky also lived and worked in Hong Kong and is fluent in Cantonese. She previously served as Human Rights Watch's media director, working with the world's journalists to help them cover crises, wars, human rights abuses, and political developments in some 90 countries worldwide. Welcome, Minky.
Thank you. Thank you all for joining us today. I have come in from New York City, where we are preparing for landfall for a hurricane. Because I lived and worked in Hong Kong for so long, where there were typhoons regularly, I tend to think that New Yorkers are just wimps, and they haven't really seen any bad weather. I'm also thrilled to be here today because I get to interview one of my literary heroes who has written this fantastic book. Just a show, show of hands from the audience. How many of you have been to China? And how many people watch the Beijing Olympics on television, right? So, I think the China that you see if you are a visitor, or even if you do business in China, if you are, or even if you just watch the opening ceremony of the Beijing Olympics, it's a modern, contemporary face. There are Starbucks every few blocks. And you very much get a sense that this is a country that has left the Maoist days behind, the Cultural Revolution days behind, the Great Leap Forward, the upheavals of the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, and certainly the upheaval of Tiananmen Square in 1989 behind. And if you are a young Chinese person, you also get the feeling that the upheavals have been left behind, that there is prosperity on the horizon. And certainly if you read the media, if you rely on Chinese media for your information, you're going to be missing a lot of important things. And I think one of the great challenges in understanding China today is that on the one hand, this is a government that has overcome a lot of adversity. It has lifted laws and regulations that have enabled ordinary Chinese people to have a better quality of life. But at the same time, it's buried its history. And that's a very dangerous thing. Many ordinary young Chinese people don't know about the recent history, and one of the challenges of understanding China is that today young people don't have the benefit of history, and it's very hard to explain something that, as far as they're concerned, simply isn't there. And an example of that would be 1989. I think there are a large number of overseas Chinese Canadians, some of whom came in the pre or post 89 period and who have the benefit of knowing what happened. But they and their children have the benefit of knowing what happened, but there are a number of Chinese people in China for whom 89 never happened. So this is a work of fiction, but it's a work of fiction that, for me, has a direct relevance to China today. And I think clearly Chinese leaders feel the same way because the book has been banned. So the other thing that you're getting to do if you buy and read this book is you get to do what Chinese people can't, to read a book that's banned in China. Although I would say there are some changes in China, including the internet. And one of the great things about modern China is that for people who try hard enough to get around the Great Firewall, they are able to. And in fact, in China, there is the term GFW means that you have been censored, you have been blocked by the Great Firewall. So another one of the great things about this book is that it brings out a sense of humor that Chinese people have when dealing with the state or trying to get around the state. Can you start us off by answering the question, why did you do this book?
Well, I moved back to Beijing in year 2000, trying to write something about China. Not everyone needs to move to Beijing to write about China, but I think it's better for me. And I have many false starts. I tried to write some fictions, and I dropped the projects until year 2008. That was a very eventful year for China. We have this major Tibetan unrest, and then a major earthquake in southwest China, and then we have the Beijing Olympics, all in the middle of a global economic meltdown. And I think the mentality of many Chinese changed that year, including some of the younger people. And I said, well, I have a contest of a story. So I started writing it in year 2009 just to, in a way, try to bridge the gap between what was used to describe China and what I see as the reality on the ground at that time. And the reason why I push it back to 2013, as I've said, is because I'm not sure people will agree to what I feel. So I try to come up with some fictional events to emphasize certain things and explain my views.
And he's done it so well that it's very hard for me to know what is fictional and what is real, which is the mark of a great writer.
It's all fictional.
I thought some of it was real. I wanted to, so, for people who even follow events in China, and there will be a leadership transition in the country in a matter of weeks. And I think it's a very funny coincidence, for example, that the US election, which is hotly contested and you can read about in the media, it's all over the news. You have the option, if you choose to, of watching a presidential debate. But so where's the coverage of this landmark every decade or so leadership transition? Where are the presidential debates on China's foreign policy and the Diaoyu Islands?
In China, you mean?
Yes.
There aren't much debate. We've been publicizing the coming of this great 18th Congress for some weeks now. And since the Central Television started to publicize it, we know it's coming. And finally, we have the date. And then it will be all very smooth. If you watch the television, there will be no struggle, no conflict, no factional infighting, nothing. It's a very peaceful transition.
Yes.
But there are all kinds of news from other outlets.
Well, one of the points that I wanted to make about the book is it is a work of fiction, but I see very many parallels in contemporary Chinese history that probably you couldn't have even imagined that the future leader of China would go missing for several weeks at a time, and even the state media could not locate him. A situation where, you obviously, this book posits that there's a missing month in Chinese people's history, but you use the phrase collective amnesia. Mm-hmm. But do you, in modern China today, on the one hand, a very modern society with gleaming malls, with, as we saw in the Beijing Olympics, the bird's nest, the ability to pull off an international sporting event, a soaring GDP, owning so much of America's debt, can you explain the inconsistency between these sort of missing moments? On the one hand, you've got China's rise, as we see and read about, and on the other hand, you have behavior that really indicates instability and weakness. Can you explain that?
Actually, it's getting more and more difficult. You mentioned 1984. In the novel 1984, there are huge scarcity. The protagonist can't even manage to find a razor blade. And then there are censorship everywhere, every corner you turn. But it's not the case in China. You have abundance now. If you go on the Chinese Amazon, you can find thousands of titles. And how will you know what books were censored out? And most people will be quite happy having all kinds of entertainment and other distractions. So it's getting more difficult. The internet you mentioned, in a way, it reminded the younger generation. Otherwise, we would have no idea that there was even a censorship, because they went on this so-called microblog, the Chinese answer to Twitter and Facebook, and they find what they've been reading 5 minutes ago suddenly deleted. Now they realize there is a big brother watching us after all. But even then, I was told only about less than 5% of netizens use this device to climb over the Chinese firewall. Most would just settle for what is available within the firewall. And of course, even within the firewall, the authority can no longer delete information in real time, but they are quite efficient. The way they do it is they ask all these providers to do the policing. They were called the internet nannies. Mm-hmm. They watch over us, and then they hire people to delete things, sometimes over-deleting things. Probably if you try to look up the surname Wen at this time, you cannot find anything. So they will over-delete, but they are doing it quite efficiently. But that also gives the younger people a little political awareness. But I'm not sure they know what to do with it, but they know they are not totally free. It's the sense of almost totally free feeling that could be very dangerous in a way, because it's only human. We won't invest our energy into looking for the remaining 1%, for instance.
And that was a reference to the front page story in the New York Times. There was a investigative piece that took about a year to write and produce and research about Wen Jiabao's family and the wealth that even the most revered leader who is thought he's called Uncle Wen, and after the Chengdu earthquake, he came and he consoled the families, and he was seen by Chinese people to be one of the true clean leaders, and the news that his family has profited immensely by his time in power, I think was a big surprise to a lot of people in China. And it led immediately to the New York Times website and the New York Times Chinese language website being Great Firewalled, GFW'd. And of course, even the satirical Gangnam-style video by Chinese artist Ai Weiwei this week was also GFW'd, Great Firewalled, even though it's, it's not his best work, I have to say. I wanted to, you raised the question of how do you deal with something that's not there, and that's why I think this book is a great service, because it's that is one of the challenges for young people today. You don't know what is missing, and so you don't even know to look for it. And the book deals with this crisis of how do you look for something that you're not even aware is missing.
The one story broke out at the New York Times when I was in Vancouver. So I could read about it, but I'm sure very few people even know the story in China. A few months ago, there was the case of this blind lawyer, Chen Guangcheng, and that also big headline news in many of the press outside of China. But inside China, most people don't know about it. Educated people, government officials. I've been asking government officials, middle-range officials. They have no idea. Well, these are my friends. They are not lying. They don't know about it because they sort of discipline themselves not to visit those bad websites outside the firewall.
Right. Don't ask a question you don't want to know the answer to, because knowing the answer can get you in trouble.
Right.
You had mentioned the people whose job, the internet censors, and there are estimates of between 50,000 and 100,000, although it's possibly more now, of internet censors. And just so everyone understands, that is, it is your job. You get up every day, you drink your tea, you eat your noodles, and you go and censor the internet all day. That's your job. And you get paid for it. They're called the 50 centers because you get paid by the deletion, or you get paid by the pro-government comment. And I think there's a whole lexicon, there's a wonderful lexicon of terms that Chinese people have come up with to deal with the people whose job it is to censor the internet. And on the one hand, people know that the internet is censored, but on the other hand, if you don't, if you go to Sina.com, if you get your news from any of the major news providers, it's an intoxicating mix of celebrity gossip, food, and news from around the world. So it appears to be real. You're just missing essential stories. Now, some people would say that you're really just a disgruntled writer who is unable to recognize the greatness of China's rise. And why are you complaining about this one blind, self-taught lawyer who obviously had to be a criminal, Guangcheng? He challenged the party over forced abortions and over disabilities rights. He served 4 years in prison. This blind lawyer attacked people and served time in prison. And then he escaped, causing an international incident. Why on earth would you want to honor someone like this his great crime, of course, has been to advocate for the rule of law in China and to hold Chinese leaders to their own promises.
Yeah, you see, sometimes,
so why should anyone know him?
Right. Exactly. The things happening in China is sometimes so incredible that if you put it into a fiction, probably your reader will not believe you. In Chen Guangcheng's case, he's been trying to advocate some decent treatment for very mature pregnant women from forced abortion, and he was in prison. And then the crazy thing is, after the imprisonment, after he served the prison term, he was released and under house arrest. And some authority paid the villagers to sort of limit him and his wife and the family at their own house. And that had been going on for years. And in spite of all the effort by the international community to appeal to the central government, nothing was done to free him. Why would the central government work with a local, probably a small department responsible for planned birth to ill-treat this blind, self-taught peasant lawyer? Why would they do that? There's no answer to that. So it's so sometimes it's so unbelievable. I mean the stories happening in China. I'm lucky that I published my book in 2009. 2012, this year, was full of incredible stories. With Wang Lijun going to the American consulate in Chengdu, things like that. If you put it into the novel, they won't believe it. But because of this false sense of freedom, someone has to tell people that it's not the whole picture. The remaining untouched part, it's what can free us from fear, from that can probably rectify past mistakes. These are the key things. In my book, I have this protagonist saying, now we have 90% freedom. What more do we want?
Yeah. Right. Well, no, I mean, he really has a point. And, you must get this response fairly frequently, which is, and I'm glad you cover the publishing industry in China, which has made a deal with the government, which is not to be too critical in exchange for the appearance of full freedom. And, a lot of people would say, why don't you just recognize China's achievements and be quiet like everybody else? I mean, why do you need to draw attention to these ugly episodes? And KOONCHUNG, the argument runs, was setting a bad example, so he had to be silenced. If you let a blind lawyer advocate for women who are getting forced, who are forced into late-term abortions, or advocate for the lowest level of society, then who knows what could happen? You have to kill the chicken to scare the monkeys. I'm sure you know this phrase.
Right. Yeah. What do you want me to say? Well, somebody has to do it. If not us, who? I mean, some must keep searching for the truth, and regardless of the utility or the truth value. Of the value of telling the truth, somebody must do it. Otherwise, we will all live in lies. That is the thing. I mean, in order to keep themselves in power, the party has been very jealous in guarding what can be said about the past and the present, and there will be only one officially censored version, and that would sort of justify their legitimacy. That's what they think. So any challenge to their version will be regarded as a challenge to their legitimacy. So they've been trying to rewrite or delete out certain things. For instance, the 89 incidents, that was not discussed. And as a result, the younger people would not know what had happened. And their parents. I have a friend whose grandson is in primary school, and the parents of this grandson specifically asked the grandfather not to talk about history to the grandson, or else he would get the grandson into trouble at school. So that's the way to operate. This post-totalitarian regime is not putting everybody into prison for saying the wrong thing. They do it in a very sophisticated and varied way. For books, they have essentially all publishing houses are state-owned, and the editors and the publishers live relatively well. They could have a decent life in China if they don't make mistakes. So they are the ones who really guard what could come out. Sometimes some daring ones try to tempt the baseline and step into the gray area. But if they make a mistake, they can have their, not only they could get fired themselves, they can have their own unit abolished. That would involve dozens of families, your colleagues for life, and they will all lose their job. That's the way to control. It's a kind of fear that will make you try to avoid things, not do certain things.
For those of you who follow things in China, there's a wonderful piece that was just published on FP, foreignpolicy.com. It's called Me and My Censor. And it's a story about by an editor, someone who lived and worked in China as at an English language paper, and about her relationship with her official censor. And it's really a sympathetic relationship. She waited until the censor left her post to write. And and you find yourself, it's a wonderful piece. It's on fp.com. And I recommend reading it because you can see the censor explains that she's really helping the editors by taking out all of this information, because once when she was a young editor herself, she published the wrong thing and they brought the hammer down on her. So you become sympathetic to the plight of these editors and these censors, because really what they're trying to do is to help journalists not cross those lines. Everyone knows where they are. And so after a while, the government doesn't have to censor because everyone knows where the lines are, and only the crazy people step over them or trip over them. Now, the problem comes, of course, when the lines move. And the lines do move. The lines move at certain times of the year. They move every year before the National People's Congress. They move every year before the anniversary of June 4th.
Or when they decided on a campaign, something like that.
They move every time there's an anniversary of an event that didn't happen, for example. But the people who do this work, you know where the lines are, and you actually know that they move during those times, so you would be crazy to write about something. And you know, one of the great things that the foreign policy piece, I think, is worth reading because it is not fiction. This is fiction. This is worth reading because it tells the story of China today. But the Me and My Censor article is not fiction. It's nonfiction, and it, I think one of the great things that the book brings out is also the codes that people use to talk about events that never happened. So it's sufficient to say the number 6-4 to refer to June 4th, 1989, or Lokse. You don't
all
really.
Kinds of,
Yeah, you don't even. Everyone can speak in shorthand because you all know the thing that is not to be referred to. It's a little bit like Harry Potter and Voldemort. He who must not be named. So what is your? I wanted to read from your book. One of the paragraphs that struck me is that you write, during the Cultural Revolution and at the beginning of Reform and Opening, there were very few books in bookstores, and everyone knew that the true facts were being suppressed. But today, thought Lao Chun, there is a profusion of books everywhere, so many they knock you over, but the true facts are still being suppressed. It's just that people are under the illusion they're following their own reading preferences and freely choosing what they read.
Yeah. I think it's important to emphasize these because otherwise, when you go to China, you will probably think that what you've learned about China is all wrong. China is better than you imagine. I have friends who, from the West who visited China, and after the tour they said, we were deceived by the Western press because everything I see in China is great. That would happen. If you watch the Chinese television, everything is happening. I mean, everything is for the better. And if you have a 2-week tour to China, you would think the same. And because it's very complicated now, it's very sophisticated. All the censorship and the repression are very targeted, and they have all developed very elaborate means to control the society, from the central government to the smallest village. And it's still a very repressive state, but you probably won't see that. So it's important that some people should keep reminding the world that it's not all good, in spite of the fact that China has becoming much richer, and many people have improved their quality of life. These are all true, the good things you said. There are good things happening too, but it could change almost, I won't say instantaneously, but it could change and go back the wrong way. It almost happened this year with some extremists trying to gain power, and then we have all these Wang Lijun Bosi-like incident, because the people in power probably want to keep things as it is and kick the can right down the road. That's the way to say it, kick the can. And then when there are more extreme factions who want to grab the power, and they will use all tricks to mobilize people. One is saying that probably we should go back to the Maoist time, something like that. Not exactly, but they use a lot of Maoist iconic, symbolic means to mobilize people who are not happy with the president. So these things could happen if we don't remind people and let people know the truth. And unfortunately, we are not free to discuss certain things. For instance, probably you will not be encouraged to just discuss the Cultural Revolution too much. You can still mention these words. Unlike the Tiananmen incident, probably you can't even mention the word Liu Si. You have to say between spring and someday between spring and summer, something like that, to escape the censor.
And talk a little bit about the economic prosperity that has led to this, that has led to this sense of satisfaction and enough. Things are good enough. Why for generations, for particularly the older generations, they experienced the Great Leap Forward, the Cultural Revolution, '89. They may want to protect the next generation by not explaining. And when Deng Xiaoping said to get rich is glorious, do you think the Chinese people bought into that?
In spite of themselves, they have to follow. And if you understand the mystery of the first 30 years, probably you can understand why they would go to the other extreme, and as the pendulum swung to that end. And the only way to protect yourself is to get rich as fast as possible at one time. I would think it will eventually swung back a little bit. Probably it already started, because it's not all bad, as I've said, everything happening in China. And I've met many very conscientious young people who've been joining NGOs, working as volunteers to help people. These probably are not reported much. That's true, because the worst thing always got reported first. So this China is huge. I mean, there are so many Chinas in China. And that is why I decided to use novel to write about all these ambiguity and complexity. It's very difficult to describe China in one breath. I wrote an article some time ago saying that we need to have the skill of the legendary Tang songstress Zhang Su, who reputedly can sing 2 songs with one mouth. 2 songs with one mouth. If you can do that, you can talk about China. you are always short of breath. It's trying to talk about on the one hand, on the other hand, China's like that now.
You've gotten at one of the great contradictions, which is that on the one hand you have a government which is still very involved in censoring political activity and writing, and on the other hand you have a number of NGOs and courageous journalists, writers, civil society leaders, health workers, young lawyers who are prepared to fight for the things that they understand are in the Constitution, but that are not always honored. Does this make you more hopeful about the future of China?
I'm still hopeful because, for instance, in the case of my book, it was published in Hong Kong and Taiwan. As soon as it was published, a dozen or so mainland daily papers and News Weekly immediately reported and reviewed it. They call it, they want to rushing through the yellow light. That means they will do it before the censorship people put on the red light.
Right.
Actually, that created a lot of interest in the book, and eventually somebody put the book on the internet within the firewall. And that's how most people read the book, by downloading it as a free content from the internet. But they're very skillful and courageous journalists too, trying to promote the book before the censor came in. So there are all kinds of resistance to this happening.
So unlike in the West, in the US or Canada, where you wouldn't want your copyright violated, you're happy to have your book copied and sent around, passed around under the table. It's viral.
It's mostly free content anyway on the Chinese internet. There's so much piracy. Probably you cannot receive too much anyway. But I even because there were several versions of my book on the Chinese internet, because you have to type it technically from traditional Chinese into simplified Chinese. There were many typos and mistakes. I proactively came up with my own version of clean, simplified Chinese version and give it to an activist and said, please put it on the internet. So there are several versions of my novels on the internet now, within the Chinese firewall.
And tell us a little bit more about the experience of getting censored. I mean, you live in Beijing. The book is freely available in Hong Kong and Taiwan, in the United States, in Canada. What is for those of us who haven't experienced being censored, explain what is involved, what happens, what is the process?
Well, the authority never came to me personally. Mm-hmm. I'm not aware of it, at least. But I have a virtual bookstore owner. There's a eBay type book website in China, and they were selling my Hong Kong and Taiwan hard copies for a while. And then suddenly the virtual bookstore was closed because of this book. And the owner complained to me, said, you caused me a great fortune. I lost all the credit on the internet. They are doing this, but they didn't come to me directly.
And but have you ever talked with Chinese officials about the book? Because you have, as characters in the book, very good replicas of Chinese officials, and you get at how they are different. They have different backgrounds, they have different personalities.
Yes.
Have officials talked to you about the book?
The censor people never came to me, but Beijing is a really interesting place, and you met all kinds of people, and then there are quite a few government officials in other capacities asked to see me and talk about my book. And one even underlined some paragraphs, and they are really serious, and they are not very unhappy about my book at all, these government officials, because they think it's quite close to the truth. Mm-hmm. And there are all kinds of factions in the party as well. They are the reformists, they are the conservative. So everybody has a different take, and some of them ask me to talk with them, not as in the capacity of the censor people.
Well, but I do think that that's part of the richness of the book, is that you do get a sense. I mean, that was what 1989 was. It was a schism straight up to the top of the party. Yeah. And so people who know that history understand that it can happen again, which is part of why you would keep that information suppressed. Is there a, inside, what is your sense of, this book is a work of fiction, and it's science fiction-y. Can you project forward? You've set the book several years in the near future. Can you project forward and tell us what is your best case scenario? What are your hopes for the future of China?
Well, I'm not really good at prediction, judging from my stock buying experience. I was forced to put it into the not too distant future because I want to come up with events that explain my view. And I also understand that if I do that, people will probably compare it with these dystopian novels, especially 1984, because 1984 is still seriously read in China. I'm not sure about other elsewhere in the world, but this book is still seriously read. They will compare it, and that could make the reading more interesting. I always advocated my version of political reform inside China. That is, if only we can follow the 1983 Chinese Constitution. I always said that. One of the reasons that so many bad things happening and so many strange things happening or uncanny events is because people are not following the law. And the reason behind it is because there's a party. The party is supposed to be above the Constitution, above the law, above the nation. And the party did not follow the law. If only we can follow the law. And if we can come back to the 1983 Constitution, which guarantees a lot of freedom and protect human personal protection. But it was like electricity appliance that has no electricity. It was there. It was a fiction. It was fictional. They put it there, but the parties called a shot. If only we can let the state, the nation, rule over the party and use the Constitution as our ultimate reference, probably China would become more acceptable in many ways. And I don't think that is a very radical solution to what China is, because there are all kinds of versions of where China should go. Some said it should follow the Western style of democracy, and that it's not happening. Some said we are doing very good, and that's not true. So I would think if we follow the Constitution, that could be a way out. That's not a radical solution. Nobody can, even the party leaders, they're also government officials. They are the chairman of the state, or they are the premier. Nobody would blame them for following the Constitution. So to answer your question.
Now, as you know, that makes you a very dangerous man, because many people have gotten in trouble for such a modest proposal.
I didn't call for American-style democracy. I just said follow the Chinese Constitution.
I wanted to say, Human Rights Watch is co-sponsoring this event, and I think the book is a very important one, because it also describes what it is to be a human rights activist, to be the skunk at the garden party, the one who's saying, well, actually, everything isn't quite as perfect as it appears on the surface. Can you talk about the effect this has had in the human rights community in China? And for those who don't follow China very closely, there is a human rights community in China. It's beleaguered, it's small, they're hauled off and beaten up, but they are fighting very hard. And tell me their reaction to the book.
One very courageous group is the lawyers. after the Cultural Revolution, and particularly in the 1980s, the Chinese state tried to restore law and order. And then they emphasized to rule according to law. So they trained up many lawyers. And then these lawyers probably really believe in the rule of law. And when the party retracked these few years, they came out to defend rights of the peasants or the workers. One recent thing is they are defending, they are asking for the abolition of the so-called labor reform. You know, the state can grab you and put you into labor reform without going through trial at all. You are not even with the court and everything. No charges, just put you into labor reform. People, young people were put into labor reform, that is labor camp, for passing on what they received from the internet to others. And the content was to be deemed subversive, and then they were put into, these are very decent young people, engineers, students, whatever, and they were put into labor reform for instance, 2 years. So now they are trying to ask the state, this is illegal. I mean, this is something we inherit from the lawless past, but it's still practicing. That is one. That's the problem with the Chinese state. They have all kinds of things to go around the legality. And for instance, in theory, if you are charged and put into a detention camp, all the questioning will be recorded. But what they do is, before that, they put you into a so-called black prison or something like that. Probably a hotel near your town, in a hotel room, and they interrogate you there, and probably make you suffer a bit. So you already confess, and then they make all the investigation before they officially take you to the detention camp and press charges, and then go through a court routine. So before that, it's the worst thing. But they would tell the world, we have very proper procedures. Once you are pressed and put in detention camp, everything will be very humane and proper.
And this is actually the intersection of your work and our work at Human Rights Watch, because
yes.
we report on black jails,
Yeah.
we report on re-education through labor. So I wanted to thank you for this book and for the work that you've done. And I wanted to say that the greatest thing will be when ordinary Chinese people can read it, not in samizdat version on the internet with, but rather when they can go to, I hope the day will come soon when Beijingers can go to a Beijing bookstore and purchase this book, but knowing that we have not reached the state of affairs that it describes. So thank you very much for speaking to us today.
That's my hope too. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chen and Minky. That was a really fascinating conversation and interview. We're now going to open it up to questions. Are there any questions from the floor? Yes.
This is working. Yes, thank you. Next month, Americans will select their president for the next 4 years. If you had 1 minute with whichever gentleman becomes president, what advice would you give him in respect to how you would like his administration to deal with the Chinese government?
I'm apparently supposed to repeat the question for an audio recording, so I'll just quickly paraphrase it. How would you, if you had 1 minute, how would you describe your advice to the president that may be winning about Chinese foreign policy?
Well, I don't think China is going to be an imperialist hegemon of the world yet. No, it's not in the Chinese blood, but China does want to be the leader in the East Asian region, at least, and be the regional leader. It's a kind of Chinese Monroe doctrine. But that will only happen if they're really facing challenges from the United States. So I would ask the candidates not to provoke. We should all constrain ourselves and not proactively try to provoke the worst from the nationalist side of China. Mostly China is reacting to U.S. action, like its claim to go back to Asia, but in a more military way, you know.
Okay, thank you.
But I believe that the candidates are using very provocative words. Yeah.
Yes.
Hello, I like your book very much, and in order to make your book credible, everything had to be so accurate and, well, proved to be true. There's a small minor point is when the high government official, he seems to be very accurate in describing the American crisis, that U.S. do not have the ability or the determination to solve their financial crisis. But there's another note saying that he's sort of optimistic about Canada. He got transferred his saving into Canadian dollars. So for those of us who live in Canada, I was thinking, what gives you that kind of optimism that Canada has a better economic future?
Yeah. In the book, I deliberately pick a relatively decent high official. I think that would make the case more interesting. If it's a really corrupt and stupid one, that doesn't really excite the readers. So they kidnapped this relatively good official. Even then, he has sent his son to Vancouver, and he had bought a house at the Shaughnessy of Vancouver. So, you know, he's not clean, Mr. Clean, no, but probably he's less corrupt than some of the high officials. And then this guy is studying the economics, and then he has been betting against U.S. All the time. He thinks U.S. is in a long decline, the dollar will be devaluated, so he always betted along against the U.S., and he thinks Canada, it's a good bet. I didn't manage to predict the crisis will happen in Europe as well. So I was thinking maybe the U.S. dollar would devalue quite a bit. That was in the book.
Question over here?
Yeah. First of all, I want to recognize your courage. Although you said you haven't been particularly harassed, living in Beijing and doing what you do does take courage. My question is related to your comment that China's big and there are many Chinas within that one big country. It's not a monolith. It's not an easy country to govern. If you look back thousands of years of history, the rulers of China have, I think, had a deeply ingrained belief that they need to control the intellectual elite and they need to control the culture in order to keep control of the country. Do you think that that is a predominant, deeply ingrained cultural, historical belief of the Chinese leadership?
Well, it's popular even among intellectuals to think that we have ingrained cultural traits. It's all true what you said, but since the beginning of the end of the 19th century, Chinese has been rebelling against these traits, and it is also true that we have incorporated many universalist ideas, such as freedom and human rights. They all came to China almost simultaneously toward the end of 19th century or early 20th century. It's not true that we are the same Chinese as the 19th century Chinese. So it's almost an insult to say that you Chinese have been for 1,000 years lived without freedom, or the intellectuals has been always in the service of the dynastic emperor. No, I don't think we are a changed nation, and though it's becoming very popular again to emphasize this, don't forget the communists were the most insistent on changing China. for some time. Now they are trying to rebuild the story along nationalist line. They are less emphasizing on their rebellious side and try to say, we've been like this all along. So this is part of our culture. Probably we should live with that. I don't think we should accept that.
So you think there may be enough people in the leadership eventually who will embrace some of the universalist ideas?
Even peasants, farmers from rural area, when their properties were infringed, they would say, this is my right, I have the right to protect my land, things like that. So some ideas just got spread, and it's almost accepted as basic, inalienable almost, even in China.
Okay, thanks.
Hi. I'm not sure if I know how to phrase this, so pardon me if I stumble around a little bit, but the knowledge that books are banned and things are censored must obviously affect what writers write. But it also occurs to me when you talk about the fact that people are self-censoring in terms of sharing their family history and the history of China's history with the young and very young generations. It seems to me as a writer that so much of what we think about and the questions that we want to pursue and things that we want to develop in fiction come out of our own family stories and the struggles that we wonder about and that we feel impelled to explore. So I'm wondering, beyond the very obvious censorship, government censorship issue, how you think this lack of sharing and carrying on the oral tradition of what came, what families went through, how that will affect art and literature coming out of China going forward in the future.
There are a lot of things families can share still. 90% of the subject matter probably are okay now, unlike, say, 20 years ago. Only those crucial, critical time that people naturally shun away from talking. In China, the writers, there are many good writers, even within the officially recognized system. For instance, members of the Federation of Writers, even within that, they are good writers. Sometimes they write in a roundabout way, using non-realistic or magical realist, modernist technique. And these works from these writers were not allowed in the 80s. The publisher could get into trouble. But the state has evolved. Now they understand these symbolic resistance did not matter much. So writers who write in the magical realist or postmodernist mode probably can get their work published, as long as you are not using very critical, realistic languages. And that's exactly what's happening with our latest Nobel Prize winner, Mo Yan. He was a critical magical realist in the 80s. Then he was courted by the state, promoted by the state, and he's now the vice chairman of this Writers' Federation, who, when you are a member of the Writers' Federation, you have many perks. And the Writers' Federation did not ask for freedom of expression for every writer.
We have time for one more question. Go ahead.
Thank you. My question concerns your personal safety, as you know, and how you're perceived on the, what I would say is the wrong side of the wall. You've been so open, and obviously you're able to travel in the West. Do you fear that your openness on this side of the ocean will compromise your ability to function and have a good life and a writing life in Beijing?
Thank you for your concern. When I was writing the book, I know I may have certain risk. though I do not know what kind of risk I'm facing. In China, even if you want to be a dissident, you may not be able to do so. It's the state which decides. If the state decides to persecute you, then you are a dissident. Otherwise, you are just a writer or a citizen, And this time, the state did not do anything to me yet. And one of the reasons is because I have a Hong Kong identity. I was from Hong Kong and have a Hong Kong special administrative region China passport. This is a bit different from a China passport. And because of this, probably I have an extra layer of protection. I don't know the exact answer to why I can still travel and live in Beijing. I tried to be quite low profile, and I was not an advocate or activist in many many things. Just try to be a writer who can stay in Beijing and keep writing.
Well, thank you to the members of the audience, and thank you so much to Chan for being here today. This was just an amazing discussion, and I know you're delighted to sign the book upstairs in the lobby. Thank you to Minky for coming from New York all the way to Toronto on this sort of crummy day, and thank you to all the volunteers who've helped so much to make this event possible. Thank you so much for coming, and please don't forget to check out the IFOA program for future events, and we look forward to seeing you again. Thank you.